Well, what do Labor insiders think about the challenges ahead for the party? A short time ago, I was joined by two former Labor leaders, the one-time West Australian Premier Geoff Gallop and the former South Australian Premier Mike Rann. Welcome to both of you. Geoff Gallop, if I can start with you, why is Labor bleeding voters on both the right and the left?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last decade is a Labor Party that's really been struggling with its record back in the 1990s. It really needed to move forward and move forward quite radically so that if it got into power, it had a very clear agenda and a clear set of convictions. But I think it fiddled around in that important period from 1996 through to 2007, didn't renew itself in terms of its organisation and structure. It hung on at the state level and I think was doing quite well there, but the federal level, they just couldn't work out a sense of direction. So when the time came and they put together a pretty good strategy in 2007 and came into government, I don't think the real conviction was there. So they started to backpedal, particularly on environmental issues, on asylum seekers, on a range of questions. And then the public said, well, we don't know what you stand for. And I think it's been hard going ever since.
What do you think, Mike Rann?
I think that one of the things, I mean, it's very, very difficult running a minority government, but one of the things too is that that I think there's got to be the strongest backing this weekend for the reforms that have been put up by Bob Carr and Steve Bracks and John Faulkner. Because you actually, you can't ask people to go out and fold the envelopes and knock on doors if they don't feel that they've got a sense of ownership of their own party. So the Labor Party needs to, as an organisation, needs to open the windows on itself and let some fresh air in. But
Geoff Gallop, if I can pick up that point, I would suspect that if I went out into the suburbs of Brisbane or Melbourne or anywhere in Australia and asked people why they turned off the Labor Party, they wouldn't say, oh, because the Labor Party's organisational structure needs updating.
Well, I think there is a connection, though, between the organisational structure and some of the broader issues. And in any case, as Mike has just said, you do need to have a membership. I mean, in modern politics, you need resources, and members are very important resources. And the current structure doesn't give a lot of meaning to ordinary party membership. And that is a real problem for the organisation as it faces the future. We've got communicative abundance, we've got people with ideas. They join the Labor Party and they last about a week because of the culture and the style of politics. So I think the organisational change is important in terms of getting the members, but there are broader issues at stake here and, about the identity of the party and the way it situates itself in our modern world.
Well, let me ask both of you about some of the policy issues that will come up at the conference this weekend. Firstly, Geoff Gallop, how do you think the party should handle the gay marriage issue?
Well, I think society's moved on that issue. I mean, our society now accepts, I think, that gay people have equal status, have equal rights in our community, and the law, I think, should catch up with that. And so, you know, I'm extremely disappointed, of course, that the Prime Minister locked herself in so quickly to the position of opposing that, because I think the world is waiting for Labor to move forward on that issue.
Mike Rann, what's your take on that issue?
Well, I strongly support same-sex marriage. I mean, people say you can't change marriage. Well, it was only a few decades ago in Australia where Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people couldn't marry in some states. It was only in the 1960s and 70s that in the public services around Australia and even in the teaching profession that when women got married they had to give up their jobs. We've seen changes to all of those laws, and I think that this is basically a human rights issue. I think the debate over the weekend has got to be how that can be achieved.
On another issue that's going to be prominent at the conference, Mike Rann, is there a disconnect between Labor's traditional progressive values and, say, an issue like selling uranium to India?
Well, I think that it's about being modern, and ultimately the Labor Party is about jobs. India has a very strong record on non-proliferation, and the United States, with IEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, sanctions and protocols, has now recognised the peaceful use of nuclear power for India. I think Canada's coming along as well. So I think that it makes sense for the Labor Party to keep looking forward rather than looking back. And ultimately, in my state, this is about jobs.
Do you, Geoff Gallop, see selling uranium to India as part of Labor looking forward?
I part company with Mike on that issue. I think the whole question of the uranium to India has to be put into the context of the message that our party sends out to the public about its views on nuclear disarmament generally. And I think early on in the government, the signs were very positive in that area. If we were to send uranium to India, we would have to get much, much better returns, I think, for that political investment than we're getting by way of the agreements the Americans entered into. And I just think, really we ought to be ahead of the game on that issue. Australia's role, I believe, is to be an honest broker on all of these issues, but to line up with the Americans and the Indians on the basis of a foreign policy position, I think is not good for the Labor Party.
Industrial relations has been a very prominent issue lately. Geoff Gallop, would you expect IR in the wake of the Qantas matter to be something that's very prominent this week?
Well, I think that's an interesting one. I mean, you've got the leader and you've got the factions in the party and then you've got the unions. And when the unions act as unions, of course, they have a very strong voice within the Labor Party. They're obviously restless on the Fair Work Act. And, I think it would be a monumental disaster if they were to push the Labor Party to further change the Fair Work Act in a direction that favoured their interests. It would open up the whole issue, which I think would give the Liberals the excuse to come in again and say, well, we'll rethink our position, given that they haven't been. And secondly, I think in terms of Australia's society today, the productivity challenges that we have, economic challenges that we have, that would be a disaster. And I think if it does happen and there's a real pressure on the government to go backwards on economic reform, I think that would tell us something about the structure of the Labor Party as well.
Well, what do you make of that, Mike Rann? And I guess also, given that most Australians these days are not members of unions, is Labor, putting itself, out of touch with a lot of people by continuing to align itself so closely with the union movement?
Well, first of all, I think that Julia Gillard's got it right on industrial relations. I think the package that she negotiated on legislation was right. I think that on the general point, however, the biggest issue is that I think that the factions, whilst factions play a valuable role in sorting out differences, you've always got to make sure that you put your country first, government second, party third and factions last. When it gets the other way round, then you get a sclerosis in the system, and we've seen quite a bit of that. Unions are very important as part of the Labor Party's base, but the fact that decisions that can be made about parliamentary matters outside of the party by faction leaders, I think that we need to basically allow much greater power to rank and file members.
Gentlemen, we're out of time, unfortunately. Mike Rann, Geoff Gallop, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.